Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. Start of part 1 of chapter 20. Uqba's invasion of the Maghreb. The vindictiveness shown by Uqba towards Abu Muhajir Dinar was part of the Arab character of the time. It was quite simple. He, Uqba, would do to him, Dinar, what he, Dinar, had done to him, Uqba. Perhaps he gloated over the power which he had now gained over the ill-fated and ill-advised ex-slave and ex-governor. But he was just in his treatment. Uqba had been put in fetters by Dinar, so Uqba put Dinar in fetters. And to indulge his Arab pride, Uqba kept Dinar with him all the time, and wherever he went, his prisoner went with him. Thus Dinar had to accompany the commander on the invasion, which was about to begin, with fetters on his feet. The poor fellow would not live to see himself a free man. Uqba set off from Caravan in about the middle of 61 Hijri, spring of 681 AD. He had an army of 10,000 at Caravan, of which half was left as a garrison, and he picked up more soldiers as he went along, adding contingents from Berber tribes as they were converted, but historians make no mention of the full strength of his army. It may have numbered 20,000 men at its peak, and he set out not with a comprehensive plan of strategical maneuver to conquer all of the Arab, but in the spirit of fighting the infidel, when he found him, where he found him, with the aim of crushing the resistance of every unbeliever who raised his head. The unbeliever raised his head at Bagaya, a large city at the foot of Jabal Oros. The city no longer exists, but was near the present Khanchela. Romans and Christian Berbers gathered in strength at Bagaya and fortified the city, making it clear that they would resist the Muslim advance. They drew Uqba like a magnet. He arrived at Bagaya and strung a line of posts around the city, keeping the main body of his army in camp some distance away for use in battle, should the Christians sally out in strength. The Christians had no intention of remaining in the fort just because a few posts had been placed around them. They came out of their city with the bulk of their army, which was larger in strength than the Muslim force opposing them. The two armies formed up outside the city and the battle began. It was a bloody, pitiless struggle with no mercy sought or shown, with every man straining every nerve and both commanders striving manfully for victory. Before the day ended, the Christian army had been cut to pieces, with corpses of Romans and Berbers strewn all over the battlefield. In this first, fierce battle of what was to be a long, fierce campaign for the Maghreb, Uqba had won a clear victory and inflicted a crushing defeat upon the enemy. The carnage was frightful, a bloody omen of what lay ahead for uqbabinnafe. The city of Bagaya was taken without further resistance, and the Muslims treated it as a prize of war. What the Muslims valued the most in the booty was the horses captured by them, which were the best they had ever seen and the best they had ever acquired in this campaign. But Uqba kept his men in camp outside Bagaya, feeling more at home in the open than inside a large city. A few weeks after this battle, when the spoils had been divided and arrangements made for the treatment of the wounded, Uqba marched to Carthage. Here too the Romans and Berbers came out to fight, and here too they suffered a terrible defeat which almost wiped out their army. Those who survived became captives, and another fine lot of horses fell into Muslim hands for use in the campaign that was to follow. Not many days had passed when Uqba received reports of a concentration of Christians at Monastir. This was quite close to Caravan but had been ignored by the Muslims, because it was just a port city and posed no threat of any kind. But after Berea and Carthage, those of the Christians who escaped the slaughter, and many others who sympathized with their cause, took refuge in Monastir. It is also likely that the Roman Empire had sent reinforcements by sea to Monastir in order to strengthen resistance to the Muslims, in the hope of regaining lost territories when better opportunities arose. However, soon Monastir was bristling with swords and spears wielded by a defiant garrison, and a defiant citizenry who let it be known that the war was still on. This suited Uqba perfectly. He marched down from Carthage to deal with this big thorn in the Muslim side. The Romans apparently were very sure of themselves, because instead of remaining in their fort, which could be supplied by sea, and which would have given them an excellent chance of prolonging the conflict indefinitely, they came out to fight. They prepared for battle on the plain west of the city. There is an open space, a flat plain extending for 2 to 3 miles, west of the old part of Monastir, ending at a salt marsh which runs for many miles further westwards. The marsh is separated from the sea to its north by a narrow strip of land, along which runs the main approach from Susa. Uqba passed by Susa and advanced along the strip to Monastir, and on the plain between Monastir and the marsh, the two armies squared off for battle. Again there was a terrible clash of arms, and the battle hung in the balance for a long time. There was a time when the Muslims were hard pressed and thought that this was the end. But eventually Uqba's presence in the front rank and the fierce tenacity of the Muslims paid off. The Romans and Berbers broke and turned in flight. The Muslims pursued them to the gates of Monastir. By the time they got there, those of the Christians who had chosen to resist lay dead on the battlefield, and only those survived who offered themselves in surrender as captives. Monastir was taken as a prize of war. The third and most hard-fought battle in Uqba's campaign was over. He had met 3 armies in the field, each stronger than his own, and decisively defeated each of them, taking a vast amount of booty as his reward for each victory. But he was back where he had started, that is Kairouan. He had done a full circle, first going west, then northeast, then south, and ending at home. He was still in Africa, and the Maghreb was a long way away. To the military student, this campaign might not make sense. Perhaps Uqba himself would make no claim to strategical wisdom. He was not working on a strategical plan, advancing from base to base, clearing and establishing lines of communication, weakening his enemy before fighting him, choosing his own ground for every battle. Luckily for him, the generals opposing him were not displaying much military wisdom either. Instead of remaining within their fortified cities to be supplied by sea and thus resist indefinitely, they kept coming out to fight in the open and in a kind of battle which was just what the Muslims wanted. Tactically, Uqba had handled his regiments very well, leading them from victory to victory, but he was not concerned with strategical principles. It is worth understanding that he was out to fight the infidel, and wherever the infidel offered battle, Uqba fought him. It was as if an enemy would appear in front of him, waving a red flag as a challenge, and Uqba would go rushing at him like a knight in shining armor. The province of Carthage was now fully subdued, and no threat remained to Kairouan. Some months had passed in these operations, which brings us to the autumn of 681, end of 61, beginning of 62 Hijri. The lateness of the season and the cold of the Maghreb winter precluded further operations. The Muslims settled down for the winter at Kairouan to await the coming of better weather. The winter ended, and it was again time for Uqba to go. He organized a garrison to look after Kairouan and placed in command as his deputy 2 good men, Suhair bin Qais al-Balawi and Umar bin Ali. He then sent for his children and said, I have purchased my life from Allah, and dedicated it to the holy war against those who disbelieve in him, until I die in the holy war and rejoin him. I know not if you will see me again after this day, for I seek death in the way of Allah. He was right. They would not see him again. Early in 682, about mid-62 Hijri, he set off once again to conquer the Maghreb. This time he really would go to Maghreb, which began where Africa ended. Beyond the province of Carthage lay the province of Numidia, and marching through Numidia, Uqba faced several armies of Berbers reinforced by Romans. Time after time the princes of the Berbers came up against him, fighting singly and collectively, and horde after horde stood in the path of his progress through their land. Time after time, Uqba fought and defeated the Berbers. Time after time, the horde recoiled and fled. He captured forts as he went along, driving his enemy in front of him. He rode through the valley of Masila, a region known to the Arabs as the Zab, leaving behind him a trail of broken Berber armies. It was in the area of this valley that Africa changed into the Maghreb. He went on until he arrived at the Heart, also called the Heart by early geographers. With every Berber force that he shattered, he converted large numbers of them and added many able-bodied men to his army, making up to strength the ranks depleted in war. The Heart was known as a very cold place. It was at the foot of the hill of Jazul by the river Mina. It was cold and wet and afflicted by heavy rainfall, and covered by a snow in the winter. An Arab who had visited the place, and was later traveling in Arabia in the heat of a midsummer's day, looked up at the sun and said, "You can burn me as much as you like, but by Allah, you are miserable in Tihart." And it is said that a visitor to Tihart once asked a native how long the winter lasted in this place. The native replied, 13 months. Tihart was a powerful fort. The Romans and Berbers living in its vicinity, their strength augmented by those who had fled before the oncoming Muslims, had concentrated in the fort to continue resistance. And Uqba came on to do these opponents what he had done to others before them. Again the Christians came out to fight in the open. Perhaps as at Bagaya, Carthage and Monastir, there had not been sufficient supplies to withstand a siege. Perhaps the Berbers, like the Arabs, did not like being cooped up in a fort. Perhaps it was just a matter of poor generalship. Whatever the reason, the defenders of Tihart came out to fight in the open and received a terrible thrashing at the hands of the Muslims. The Christians turned and fled, leaving a battlefield covered with bodies, hoping to find safety within the fort, which they should not have left in the first place. The Muslim cavalry galloped after them, caught up with them, went through them, cutting them down left and right, and got to the gates of the fort before the stricken army arrived. Here in a last bloody action the Muslims slaughtered the fugitives, and spared only those who readily laid down their arms. Uqba spent no longer than was necessary at the Heart. Rebuilding his strength, he resumed his relentless westward advance, but now the enemies who remained in his path would no longer fight him. The Christians fled from his route of march, scattering in all directions, abandoning towns and villages. Many contingents locked themselves up within forts, and wisely would not come out to fight, preferring the safety of the fortress to the doubtful glory of fighting a great Muslim conqueror. Uqba had no desire to get involved in siege operations. It was not the way of the Arabs, nor did he have any siege equipment. Whenever a defended fort lay in his path, he would circumvent it and march on, fighting only those tribes which stood in the open to dispute his passage. All who opposed him bit the dust. When the last of the opposition had been cleared, Uqba passed from province of Mauritania to the province of Tangier, governed by Count Julian on behalf of the Gothic king of Spain. End of part 1 of chapter 20.